So let me also just put a footnote to Christoph's intro as me being the founding father of design science in the management field. I think that is a bit overstated. I think the true credits would need to go to people like Alma Huchuel, a French scholar, and Johan van Aken, who was actually in Eindhoven, where I'm currently based. Until 6-7 years ago, he retired at the time. So I started off with Johan's work as an point of access to the design science literature, and later also became familiar with Alma Huchuel's work, amongst that of many others, like Nigel Cross's work on design, etc., etc. I think the main difference between Alma and Johan van Aken's, I'm referring to here, is that they both came from engineering design and became interested via Simon's work in design science. I come from a social science background and became interested in design, which means that my work also has a strong intention to combine design and science, which probably explains why some of my work has become more prominent and more accessible, and has also been published more earlier than the work by those two other guys. Because I've started publishing earlier in the top journals about design science, but I think Johan and Armand actually were already in the field publishing in French and in Dutch on this particular topic 20 years earlier. So I think I have to give them the credits for that. So let me just go through a few key ideas on design science as we envision it in Eindhoven. So it's first and foremost a mindset, problem-solving approach, like also Jan has advocated strongly. Can also be conceived as a generic research methodology, which I'll do in most of this presentation. But it's good to point out that this mindset, underlying mindset, may allow you, in fact, to forego any explanation of design science. So some of the work we have done on design science actually doesn't talk about design science at all, just talks about the problem and its solution and how we tested the solution, which is quite common actually in the engineering literature, where like in information systems, design science is quite common sense and kind of a standard approach. And so the kind of approach we're taking is that it includes creative design methods like those advocated by Nigel Cross, Chris Argyros, etc., and a few others. I think that also a few of the other participants have already referred to, as well as, let's say, the more traditional social science methods in terms of data collection and analysis. And which also means that the actual methods used within this overall more broader research methodology are actually quite common. Case studies, intervention studies, experiments, surveys, etc. I think we've been using all of these methods in one way or another at some point in time. The main difference here is, as Henrik has also explained, that we're studying artifacts rather than an existing reality. So we're studying something being designed and created. So the actual prototype, for example, is being tested out, and then you do a case study, or you do a pre-test, post-test, experimental study to find out whether that particular prototype works or not. Another key idea, I think, is the plurality of design science methodology. I think I would go as far as saying that there is no single methodological standard yet in design science. That may also be a key challenge for Henrik's new journal, but that's the actual state of the field in the management area. I think it's similar probably in the information systems arena, where you have different kind of methodological flavors also and takes on the design science. So I actually, in supervising design science work already at the undergraduate level, but certainly at the graduate level, I always recommend students to develop their own their own iterative cycle on design science, which allows them to perfectly match the method they're using with what they're actually doing. So that also explains why, if you look at my work together with, for example, Madis Tomar, who's also in the session, and many others, and also many former doctoral students, that in all publications you'll find slightly different or completely different interpretation of design science, also in terms of the visual figures we use to explain it. And to drive down that plurality perspective a bit further, I'm here using a figure we published a few years ago in an article in the Journal of Business Venturing, Insights, in a special issue, actually guest edited by Henrik and a few others, where we made a distinction between design, the upper half of the figure, and science, here called validation, the lower side of the figure. And the design side is then about creating and evaluating. I think, as also explained by Jan in very eloquent terms. And the evaluating phase here is more about is the actual prototype being created feasible? Is it acceptable for its users, etc., etc. And so it's more about how does it actually work for users and other stakeholders. Whereas the lower side of the figure is more about the underlying theories and justifying these theories. I'm using the term justifying in line with the Martin-Smith article on design science in the information systems field. So it's more about testing a theory or a solution based on that theory, rather than evaluating it from a more practical point of view. So this type of figure also helps to explain, I think, to extend the dialogue we already started there on how does the design thinking or the more broader design literature fit into the design science literature, where I think our point here is we're combining design and science, also to make this kind of research publishable in the mainstream journals that typically thrive on a scientific perspective. So we're trying to do both. But it's both and perspective, which also means that most of our work is at the interface of design and validation, and using, for example, a concept like design principles to inform the creative side of stuff, or just to try to reflect and synthesize the experiential findings coming from the design side into design principles that we can then theorize about in terms of the underlying mechanisms, etc., etc. And so design principles is a key boundary object, so to speak, between these two sides of the same coin. To emphasize the plurality of design science in a different manner, and this picture at the right side enlarges kind of the football that you see in the picture at the left also, which emphasizes also that the actual artifact we're designing and validating is in a lot of cases are a kind of practices, including tools to help out practice. But it can also be values, can also be constructs, models, design principles, because they also have to be created. So if you don't have if you're really in a new territory where there is no existing theory or whatever that can help you out, then you have to create your constructs from scratch. So you're actually then more in the design mode than in the validation mode. Although those constructs will, in the end, in the long run, especially, play a key role also in the theorizing and the justifying side in the below segment of the picture at the left. But constructs and models also have to be created. So there's also kind of a creative and an abductive element there also, which this particular figure then also helps to handle quite effectively. So let me talk a bit about the publication strategies, as I was asked to do. I think the main challenge in terms of publishing design science research is that a lot of editors and reviewers, especially in the more mainstream journals in our field, have a social science background training, and therefore are quite unfamiliar with this kind of work. Which also means that whether you need to explain design science extensively or not, or hardly, is also dependent on whether your key audience, especially in this case the reviewers, editors, have this problem-solving mindset and/or are familiar with the design science literature. Let me give a few examples of work we have done. This is all work actually done with former doctoral students. I think we have a lot of doctoral students in the audience here today, so that may be helpful to understand that this is all work primarily done by doctoral students, co-supervised by me and several others in Eindhoven. So this is a piece coming out of the dissertation by Madis Talmar, published in Long Range Planning. It's basically a tool for mapping, analyzing, and designing innovation ecosystems. This particular article actually was submitted initially with a short design science section, but the paper was too long, as assessed by the editor and the reviewers. So in the actual article published, we took out the method section totally, which was acceptable for the editor also, which was also done probably because Long Range Planning is a typical journal at the interface of practice and academia. About half of the audience of the regular readership of LRP are practitioners, and they are not really interested in method sections. So most articles in this journal don't have any method sections. Which also explains why this kind of work can be quite easily published also in Long Range Planning without actually explaining the underlying methodology. An example of very concisely explaining design science is work by together with another former doctoral student, Freek Mulman, published in the California Management Review, which is a tool formula codified in terms of design principles, but also fully developed in terms of a software package that was tested actually by means of an experimental pre-test, post-test design. This particular article was in the end published in the form of an article with a single endnote explaining the design science methodology. It's a long endnote. In this particular case, I think it explains, it refers to Simon, but also gives a number of references to other DS-based studies to illustrate that this kind of research has been done before and is and can be seen as quite mainstream in some way. I think it's footnote, endnote number 40 in this particular article, if you want to look it up. Another article this is like an example of extensively explaining design science. A more older article is one of my first doctoral students in Eindhoven, Elko van Burg, work on university spin-off creation, case study, especially also of our own campus here in Eindhoven. This particular article does immediately throw in design science in the intro section, building on science. It also includes a more elaborate method section later in the paper, which was also critical in getting that paper published in the Journal of Work Innovation Management. And the final example of extensively explaining design science is this particular paper on publishing Technovation. I'll skip that for the moment to speed up the things a bit. These are examples of the variety in terms of how extensively you need to explain design science, especially contingent on what the audience already knows about design science, and especially also whether it shares this kind of a problem-solving mindset that is very critical in design science work. For the doctoral dissertations, actually the same variety applies. So some of the doctoral dissertations in this area I supervised only have a very short section on design science in the intro chapter, whereas others have a very elaborate chapter in later in the dissertation. So you have this similar variety here. Final tip I want to give on getting this kind of material published. is to refer to pragmatism as the underlying philosophy of design science. Actually, there has been quite a debate in especially the British Journal of Management a number of years ago on what the underlying philosophical underpinnings are of design science, talking about critical realism, etc., etc. We've tried to shortcut the discussion in terms of an article published in 2015. I was the lead author there, but it includes as a co-author all the other people involved in that particular discourse. And actually, the underlying philosophy here is pragmatism. I think the best source on this is John Warfield's book, The Science of General Design, which has a few chapters on Peirce and Dewey, etc., etc., and how these philosophers develop into pragmatism lens as the ideal outlook for design science in terms of philosophy. Typically we don't go into the philosophical stuff in any of the articles we publish, but we have found instances where, for example, in the reply to reviewers, we needed to explain what the actual philosophy underlying design science was to a particular reviewer or editor. So we typically did that in that particular secondary document to kill that further dialogue and to eliminate that resistance with a reviewer. That typically also helps. You have to know that pragmatism is the actual background here. Then I think the final trick I want to point you out to is, I think that's already clear in the discourse thus far in this session. We're, I think, mainly using Herbert's Simon for political reasons, and we're not using, for example, Argyris or Cross or many other famous people, especially in design science, in the design thinking discourse, but lesser known, especially among the scientific scholarly community. So we're basically building on Simon's reputation as a Nobel Prize winner to enhance the legitimacy and credibility of using design science. It's not so much building on what actually Simon has literally said also in the Science for the Artificial, because also that book has been heavily criticized, I think rightly so, by a number of design scholars. But again, it just simply helps to use Simon whenever it's helpful to get you across the review barriers in getting published. This is a kind of a project folder we have created at the ResearchGate with, I think, more than 80 publications, including some of the initial conceptual work by Johan van Aken, me, and several others, but also lots of examples of published work on design science applications. And so to summarize, design science is a mindset, but you can also present it as a research methodology. But if you do that, then make sure that you are aware of the fact that it's plural in nature, and you can actually apply it in publications in many different ways. And I think I'll follow Henrik's example by just only pointing out that I'm now, since last year, an area editor at Technovation, with the assignment to build the design science section in Technovation. So I think for University of Technology, Technovation typically is seen as an A journal. At business schools, that may be less so the case, but that's not really my problem, of course. So if you're interested in publishing in Technovation and you have a manuscript that you think may fit, just contact me with an abstract or a full paper before you actually submit, so I can give you feedback on that particular paper. Thanks. That's it.